Hey, what's cracking everybody? Welcome back to Computer Games Hardware. Today on the channel, we got an awesome one for you guys. We're doing something a little bit different and we're going to be having a bit of fun. Today, we are talking about the top 20 PS1 games that should be remade. I've got 20 that I'd love to go through with you. So let's get stuck into it. We got a lot to get through. At number 20, we have Apocalypse. Bruce Willis games, man. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a time period where you could open up a console, stick a CD in, and play a game featuring Bruce Willis. This was a third-person shooter platforming game released on the PS1 and it was developed by Neversoft. It's basically Bruce Willis fighting the four horsemen of the apocalypse who were invented by an evil scientist. I love this game. It's the classic third-person shooter that was initially developed to be sort of like a buddy cop film game where Bruce Willis' character was going to be the AI character that came along your journey with you, but when they got Bruce Willis, they decided to make him the starring character. This Neversoft title is noteworthy because this was the game engine that they used to create Tony Hawk's Pro Skater.
Yo, do a kickflip!
This one is well deserved on the list. Nothing new or crazy here, but it would definitely be fun to see some old school Bruce Willis games remade for the modern consoles and the modern era. At number 19, sticking with Bruce Willis games, we have the Die Hard trilogy. Do you guys remember this game? The Die Hard trilogy was banging in its day. It was an absolute cracker. 3 games in one. Welcome to the party, pal.
Welcome to the party, pal!
We had Die Hard, Die Hard 2, and Die Hard with a Vengeance. 3 distinct segments of 3 different games was a really big thing at the time. There was the first part that was Die Hard, which was classic third-person shooter. Die Hard 2 was on-rail shooters, and then Die Hard with a Vengeance was like driving around crazy taxi style all around New York. This game was absolutely crazy and it was very well received when it came out, and the value proposition, I remember like telling mum, but mum, it's like 3 games in a row and it's Die Hard, and like the big thing was like, oh, I don't know if I should be getting you Die Hard, but you know, it was one of those things that we watched every year anyway, so you know, they put the money down and I got to play Die Hard for hours and hours. At number 18, we have Jet Moto. It was an absolute cracking game. It had pretty good graphics for the time as well. You know, you have that like interlaced PlayStation look, but it was great fun. The big thing in Jet Moto was you could hover over land and sea, which was a real great time. You could do all crazy jumps and time trials and stuff like that. And I miss this sort of era of PlayStation games. Like, you know, you could get a whole variety. PlayStation have sort of narrowed in to what their niche is, which is the you know, big budget single player title, but I would love to see some of these titles on the PlayStation 5. Could you imagine they brought back Jet Moto? It would be an absolute blast.
I have no idea why it's there. Like I said, I went in and wanted to look at it to see if there was any foul play involved.
Let me finish my question and then you can answer, okay?
At number 17, sticking with a similar theme, I've picked Air Combat. For the same type of reasons as we picked Jet Moto. This was like a action combat simulation game which spawned the Ace Combat series. This was the first one in the series, developed by Namco for PlayStation, which Namco was huge in the PlayStation era, and they will have a number of titles running throughout this series. But Ace Combat was originally a arcade game from a couple of years ago, which they ported to the PlayStation. It was a huge success, and at the time it was like the ultimate flight simulator. Like, if you wanted arcadey action sort of dogfighting, this was the game. It wasn't the best game in the world. The controls were a bit tricky. It was a pretty steep learning curve, but I love this game and I pumped a whole bunch of hours into it. I'd love to see something like this on the PS5 in the coming years. Alright guys, at number 16 we have Ape Escape. Just make a new Ape Escape. What's the big problem here? Like, we haven't got one since 2010. Just make a new Ape Escape, please. This game was a third-person action platformer where you had to chase apes around and stop them from changing the course of history with all their crazy gadgets and doing crazy things. Ape Escape, you can still see Ape Escape in the lexicon of PlayStation games. They feature in all types of titles. I believe they're in Metal Gear Solid 3. It's just a really good time. This like crazy, wacky concept games that we just don't see enough of anymore. This was one of the best. It was a really good fun to play with. Not the most amazing graphics, not a big story, just big on fun. I think you can play these games on modern consoles already, but I would love to see a new iteration of Ape Escape. At number 15, we're getting into some vehicular combat with Twisted Metal. Why haven't they made a new Twisted Metal? We got a TV show. We've had this revival in some of these PlayStation games, but we haven't had one of these games in ages. The crazy, wacky vehicular combat game. This one was one developed by Sony. It was one of the big marquee PS1 titles when it came out. This game was just a real good time. I think if I mention Sweet Tooth, that 99% of gamers over 30 will know who I'm talking about. So, it's just one of those things. It was, again, not the best looking game, but it would just had that addictive gameplay that you could play over and over and over again. So that's my pick, Twisted Metal. At number 14, we have Parappa the Rapper. You guys all remember Parappa the Rapper, the rhythm game that started it all. Now we've got like Wi-Fi Rush and Beat Saber and all those mobile games and stuff like that. But what happened to poor Parappa the Rapper? He was sort of like a little PlayStation icon at one stage. His game was huge. Again, another highly addictive, really simple game to play with a fantastic art style for the PlayStation era. Parappa the Rapper looked really excellent, and it had a interesting cast of characters as well. It was really well received by critics at the time. I loved it. The music in Parappa the Rapper was amazing. This was an awesome little game to play, and I would love to see something like that with the Just Dances and all these rhythm games that we're playing there that bring back some of the classics. Parappa the Rapper was an awesome little title. And at number 13, I have picked Destruction Derby. This game was awesome fun. Now, for mine, it wasn't the best looking game around, but it had destructible environments. So, there was a bit of trade-off there. It was a little bit crazy. I had a really good time with this game. It also spawned a sequel, and one of the big things of Destruction Derby is it had a couple of game modes. So you had Destruction Derby, you had Time Trial, you had like wacky racing, and then you had like stock racing as well. So there was plenty to do in a game that you thought would be pretty straightforward. Based on the sport of actual Demolition Derby, this was like racing to destroy cars, and Destruction Derby was a massive hit when it came out. That's why it's my pick for number 13. Alright, and at number 12, I have Driver. Now, this game was also subtitled Driver, You Are the Wheelman. Don't know, it was a crazy time for video game titles in that time. But this game was like an action driver series where you were kind of think like the Transporter, where and Interstate 76, where you would drive around doing these crazy missions, GTA style. This one was a really good, nice and tight sort of single player story. The missions were crazy and fun. You might have known the notoriety for this game for its opening level, which was really, really difficult to get through, and some people couldn't get through it. You were in like a parking garage and you had to do all these tricks before you could get out of the parking garage, and it was difficult. We spent hours trying to figure it out because it wasn't immediately clear on how to play the game. So some people couldn't even get out to play the first mission and turned it off and hated this game. But it sold like hotcakes. It was a big smash hit. I love this one. It's Driver. Unfortunately, I think GTA has saturated the market and there's not much room these days for games like this anymore. It's just going to have a paled comparison to GTA these days, but it would still be fun to see. Alright guys, at number 11 we have Darkstalkers. I absolutely love this game, and with the fighting renaissance, the fight naissance that's come over the last couple of years with titles like Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8 and all these other crazy titles, I think it's a perfect time to get back into the Darkstalkers series. So this is where it all started, on the PS1. Developed by Capcom, one of my favorites of all time, and Psygnosis. This was like the monster universe for fighting games, and it was good fun. Now, this was one of those games that was like, you know, talked about as one of the games of the year when it released, but it sort of just went off into its own thing. And with all the fighting games that's coming out, it might be worth a revival, and Darkstalkers certainly fits the bill. Guys, let's waste no time and get stuck straight into the top 10. And at number 10, I have put Time Crisis. Time Crisis was one of those light gun G-Con titles that absolutely took over when it came out. It was a huge smash hit which I pumped so many hours into. Released by Namco, this was the arcade smash hit. This could be on the arcade list. It even could be on the PlayStation 2 list because it had success there as well. But it first came to us on the PS1 with the Namco light gun G-Cons, and it was a massive smash hit. Reliving the arcade smash hit at home was a huge experience for me. Me and my mates would just pump hours into this game, and Time Crisis set itself apart with the cover system. So there were games like Virtua Cop and things that had come before it, House and the Dead that came after it, but this was the first that introduced that cover system. Time Crisis also had a pretty compelling story for what it was. You know, it was not an easy game. You had different colored enemies. So I think you had green, blue, and the hard ones were yellow. They would shoot like cannons and RPGs and stuff at you. It was absolutely insane. This also had that, it was 3D, but it had that shifting perspective. So you would go to one area, run off, and it would rotate the camera angle to go into your new cover position. Obviously, none of the ports hold a candle to the arcade, but it was really fun playing this game at home. I love this one. That's why it's at number 10. At number 9, we have Siphon Filter. Oh, Gabe, the long lost brother of the stealth action genre. This game was one of those free moving third person shooters where Gabe was on that axis where, you know, his legs could go one way and he could aim the other way. Funnily enough, it sort of had like elements to like GoldenEye and Metal Gear Solid, but it was more action focused. So this was the action hero for the PlayStation era, Gabe Logan. You know, they really went hard on, you know, making this guy like a Solid Snake type, stealthy sort of action hero. This game was very well received when it came out, and it's a pity that it dropped off. There's been a number of sequels, but nothing really hit the height. You know, this was like Metal Gear Solid sort of younger brother. The graphics weren't kind of as good. The story wasn't sort of as cinematic, but it was a PlayStation game of its time. And I kind of miss these kind of games. I really would think that Siphon Filter would be a excellent candidate for a modern upgrade. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright, at number 8 we have Gex 3D Enter the Gecko. And I know what you guys might be thinking. There is a Gex Trilogy remake in the works by Limited Run Games on the Carbon engine, which I am completely excited for and I'm here for. But I wanted to talk about it anyway because this is one of my all-time favorite games. Gex 3D Enter the Gecko was one of those games where it came from Gex being a Windows game that was just hit at the right time for the shift into 3D. So when the sequel came along, and this is a Crystal Dynamics title, by the way, I think midway with the original developers. I'm not sure how that worked there, but at the time, they were ready for this game to take the leap from 2D into 3D, and this game just had all the elements that I loved. It had pop culture references. It looked like Super Mario 64, but it had like teenager wit and charm. It had references that I understood.
I understood that reference.
The voice acting was incredible. It was a really funny game. When Gex came out, he had more one-liners in one game than I think had ever been done before. And, you know, when he was doing like a 007 mission, he'd have his little tuxedo, or he was a chef. It introduced that kind of switching costumes and things like that. This was an all-time classic, so that's why it's number 8 on the list.
They play rough. Start giving me the business. I give a little back.
At number 7, we have Jackie Chan's Stuntmaster. Developed by Radical Entertainment, this is another one of those games similar to Gex, which was just a really, really good time. Jackie Chan's grandfather has been kidnapped, and the Stuntmaster has to run through New York City beating up bad guys to get him back. Now, this game was not the smash hit that you might think, but I loved it. Jackie Chan was at the height of his power. Rumble in the Bronx had been out for a few years now. I believe he was doing Jackie Chan's Third Strike at the time. So Jackie Chan was on fire, and this game was fun. Jackie Chan provided the voice, and he did the motion capture as well. And if you 100%ed the game, it unlocked some videos of the motion capture and Jackie Chan talking about the game. So I absolutely love this game, and I would love to see this remade for modern hardware. I'm not even sure you can get this game anywhere other than emulation. If you know, let me know in the comments down below. Jackie Chan Stuntmaster is my number 7. Alright guys, moving on to number 6. My pick is Pitfall 3D Beyond the Jungle. Now, this is another game that was sort of middle of the range, but similar to Jackie Chan and Gex, it had that style of game that I just love. Goofy one-liners, good fun gameplay, and just enough of a story holding it together to have a good time. Pitfall, obviously Activision's baby, one of the big marquee titles of the Atari era. This was Activision's attempt to bring Pitfall Harry back into the 3D limelight as a descendant of Pitfall Harry, I believe. Pitfall Harry Jr., voiced by the iconic Bruce Campbell, was another one that was, really middle of the road. They were going for something that they didn't quite hit, so unfortunately it wasn't the best game, but it was another game that I absolutely loved for that one-liner. It had all those elements that I loved, but it really didn't come together. So what they were trying to do with this game was sort of, they had that Crash Bandicoot era where it was super linear, and then you had the Super Mario 64 that was super open, and they wanted a nice mix in between. And they tried to do that with different camera angles and getting in close and having narrative choices, but it all didn't really come together. Some of the camera angles would make the platforming a nightmare. Some of the story elements were a bit too fantastical, probably for a Pitfall story as well. So it didn't really hit the heights that Activision were probably hoping for at the time. I certainly loved it though. I played this game over and over again, mostly because I couldn't finish it because it was just too hard. It was too difficult to get the platforming right. So I spent hours in this game and I enjoyed it. I would love to see a Pitfall revival. Wonder what Bruce Campbell is doing. I'd love to see Grandpa Pitfall Harry going on a new adventure. So that's why Pitfall 3D Beyond the Jungle is my number 6 for PS1 games that I would like to see remade for modern hardware. Alright, we're at number 5, guys. So before we do, if you're enjoying this series, please smash that like button, share and subscribe. You guys have been watching the videos. I really appreciate that. Hello to all our new subscribers there. I'm going to make this a regular thing, this series. So if you're enjoying it, please let me know. What do you think the top 5 is going to be, guys? Alright, let's get stuck into it. At number 5, we have Nightmare Creatures. I absolutely loved this game when it came out. Nightmare Creatures was one of those games where it had the elements of Resident Evil and the elements of a 3D fighting game with the feel of Silent Hill all rolled into one. It had that old Victorian Alone in the Dark style. It was an absolute banger. You could play as 2 characters, a male and female character, who had different primary weapons, but you could also use bombs and primary guns and magic and all sorts of stuff. This game was notable for using actually 19th century Gothic blueprints of London, I believe, to recreate the game environment. Now, this game also suffered from the PS1 camera angle issue that, like a lot of those games at the time did. They didn't really get it right until Super Mario 64, to be honest with you. So all these titles had clumsy controls and camera angles, and Nightmare Creatures was no different, but it was just another one of those games that had a mixture of everything I loved, and one of those style of games that I was just down for as soon as I saw it. That's why Nightmare Creature is number 5 on the list. Number 4, we have Dino Crisis. Now, I know that a bunch of you agree with me on this one, because every time Capcom sends me out a little thing that says, what would you like to see remake? Dino Crisis is always on the top of the list. This was the action Resident Evil like type of game with dinosaurs. The survival horror genre really flourished in the PS1 era, and Dino Crisis was one of those fan favorites. It's an absolute classic, and it's basically Jurassic Park in Resident Evil. You play as Regina. You're a special agent that's gone to investigate a top secret facility, and when you get there you find dinos on the loose. And so this game had all the Resident Evil trappings, the good health, danger, all that sort of stuff. classic tank controls. One of the big gameplay mechanics in this title was its auto lock-on feature, which was different for the Resident Evil titles and set it apart at the time. It was crazy good fun, and fans have been asking for a remake for years and years, and I think it's about time. So Capcom, if you're watching, give the people what they want. It's time for a Dino Crisis remake on modern hardware. Okay guys, at number 3, I bet you most of you were thinking this would be my number 1, but it is Metal Gear Solid. Now, I know there's tons of remakes and rumors and stuff in the works, but we're talking about the PlayStation games that we would like to see remade for modern hardware, and number 3 on my list is Metal Gear Solid. Written, produced, and directed by Hideo Kojima, gaming's auteur. This game was what brought cinematics into gaming. It was the huge tactical espionage action, and probably one of my favorite games of all time. Now, the reason why it's a little bit lower on the list is, as you know, there are things in the works with the Metal Gear Solid series, so I don't anticipate the Metal Gear Solid series actually dying or outright, but it's been a hot minute since we've had a Metal Gear Solid game. So this one really does deserve the remake treatment. It was an absolute trailblazer for its time. The cinematic feel of Metal Gear Solid, stealth gameplay, the action elements to it, all came together to tell one of the most compelling stories in gaming history, spawning some of the most crazy sequels of all times and one of the biggest game franchises of all time. Metal Gear Solid is up there with my favorite titles of all time, and I'm sure most of you feel the same way. So why isn't it at number 1? Well, there are just some titles that probably deserve to be remade a little bit earlier. So what do you think we've got in the number 2 and the number 1 spot? Let me know in the comments down below. You know, navigating through Shadow Moses Island using your pack of smokes, your night vision goggles, and your trusty handgun to take down Foxhound was, you know, one of the most compelling things you could do on the PlayStation. My mum would even sit down and watch me play as a kid on the couch and get engaged in this story. It was one of the seminal PS1 games, and it's often considered one of the best video games of all time. It deserves the remake treatment, I think. They've done it a few times, which is another reason why it's not number 1 on the list, but I reckon what they should do with the Metal Gear series is reboot the trilogy. Start at Metal Gear, do Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, and then round it out with Metal Gear Solid. That would be a fantastic little trilogy, and what they could do is they could scale it back. You know, they could bring it back to what it was before it got into Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty territory, which I love, by the way, but I had a soft spot for those games, particularly the MXS games, which were legendary in my time because I couldn't access them. I couldn't get my hands on them. It was very difficult to play MSX games back in the day. We had the NES versions, which we knew were the inferior copies. When Metal Gear Solid came out, it was like being able to start from scratch and relive those stories which I wasn't able to get my hands on. I could go on and on on why Metal Gear Solid deserves its modern remake, but I'm gonna leave it there. Kojima-san, Konami, come together, make it happen. Let's have that announcement that directed by Hideo Kojima, and let's do it. Let's do an original Metal Gear Solid trilogy rounding out with Metal Gear Solid. That would be an absolute dream for an old gamer like me.
Snake, are you okay? Snake? Snake?
Alright guys, at number 2 we've got Tenku Stealth Assassins. This game was in the same pedigree as Metal Gear Solid at the time. It was one of the titles that popularized the stealth action genre, and it was very well fitting. Developed by Activision, this was Activision's response to Metal Gear Solid, and a very awesome entry into the stealth genre. In this game, you could scale rooftops, you could hide behind walls, disappear into the darkness, and you had like a sort of stealth meter. I can't remember what it was called. It was like it was something that let you help. You could peer across. You could peer around corners and things like that. It was truly awesome ninja action stealth experience. This game was also one of those titles that we almost didn't get because it wasn't set to be released outside of Japan until some of the heads at Activision saw it and said, no, I think that it will be receptive, understanding the popularity of Metal Gear Solid at the time too. You had all these sort of different weapons and techniques and things, like you had health potions, you had like cantrips, you had ninja stars and all that sort of cool stuff at your disposal to either take on your enemies or disappear into the night. This was an absolute classic. It sold like gangbusters worldwide. Despite the stiff competition from Metal Gear Solid, it stood out as one of the great stealth action games of all time on the PS1 era. So I'd love to see a modern remake of Tenku Stealth Assassins. That's why it's number 2 on the list. We're finally here, but before we do, if you've enjoyed this series, please let me know in the comments down below, and we will look at doing other series. What do you want to see? Do you want to see Sega Saturn games? Do you want to see older titles? Do you want to see PS3, PS4 games? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright, at number 1 we have Parasite Eve, Square's massive RPG Resident Evil style survival horror game that was a massive smash hit. People loved this game, myself included. Based on the series of novels, Parasite Eve was a massive success when it came out, and it did a lot of things right. It was one of the best looking games on the PS1. It took elements from lots of different genres, mainly the Resident Evil series, and just made a really creepy survival horror type of game. And you know what it was about Parasite Eve? It was the mixture of Final Fantasy and Resident Evil coming together that made it such an awesome game, and why I think it deserves our number 1 spot for PS1 games that deserve a modern day remake. This game had everything. The story was compelling. It was based on a novel. Parasite Eve was such a beautiful game. It had a really compelling story. It was just really mature for this time. So for a teenager growing up and getting Metal Gear Solid, Tenku, and Parasite Eve all around the same time within a couple of months of each other, it was a stepping stone into a new era of gaming. For me personally. So it was getting into more mature games. It was JRPG type of story, which I hadn't really been exposed to. It was sort of one of those really JRPG stories which I was just getting into, and the gameplay was awesome. It looked beautiful. It's a very linear story, but that's because it was based on a novel and there was obviously hardware limitation. But like Final Fantasy VII, this is one of those games with gorgeous backgrounds that I absolutely loved, and it would make a amazing remake for modern day hardware. Think about the way you could tell this game now. I think it should be a priority for Square. Parasite Eve was developed on a modded version of the Final Fantasy VII engine, and it looked absolutely gorgeous, and it would bridge the gap between the visuals of Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. This game was also developed with Japanese and American staff in mind, so they had it in mind on how they wanted to produce this game, with the setting being New York City. So you play as Aya Euro, a rookie detective cops that goes to the opera one night, and the opera, everyone starts dropping off like flies, and then the main opera singer transforms into this beast-like creature and declares that they are Eve and disappears off into the sewers. So you are tasked with going after this creature and uncovering the mysteries of Parasite Eve. It would absolutely make for a modern day masterpiece. If you think Stellar Blade is going off right now, a modern remake of Parasite Eve would just blow people's minds away. I think that it is a worthy game for our number one spot of the PS1 games that should be remade for modern hardware. It is an absolute classic, and I would even encourage you, if you've never tried this game before, to go back and check it out, and you will see what I mean. It certainly deserves the remake treatment. Well, that rounds out our PS1 games that we'd love to see remade for modern hardware. How do you think we did, guys? What do you think about the games that we chose? Did you like the top 10? What about the top 5? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I've had a really good time making this series, so big thank you for everyone who's watched and supported the channel. I'll keep making these if you keep watching them, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. See you next time.